Hi guys, Miss Francis here. The Hardy-Weinberg theorem explains the 5 conditions that must be met for evolution not to occur. But when these following factors occur, then allele frequency changes within a population and therefore evolution has occurred. So first of all, genetic drift. Genetic drift is when there are changes in the gene pool due to chance fluctuations in small populations. So the small population drifts away genetically from the larger population. And there are 2 situations in which genetic drift can happen, the founder effect and the bottleneck effect. Natural selection is when organisms that are best adapted for an environment survive, reproduce, and then pass along those better suited adaptations. Gene flow involves the movement of genes in and out of population. Mutation is a change in DNA, and non-random mating involves individuals selecting their mate. In other words, it is not random. Now, all of these factors represent departures from the conditions required for the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. In other words, if any of these factors are present, then there will be a change in allele frequency, and therefore evolution has occurred. Natural selection is all about Charles Darwin. It is how the best traits are selected for, which is completely dependent on the environment, and it's the only condition that favors a positive outcome. Genetic drift occurs when there are changes in the gene pool that are created due to chance fluctuations in small populations. When I have a smaller sample, then there is a greater chance of deviation from an idealized result because in a smaller sample, there's going to be a greater impact. Genetic drift at small population sizes often occurs as a result of 2 situations, the bottleneck effect or the founder effect. So the bottleneck effect often occurs when the numbers of individuals in a larger population are drastically reduced by disaster, either a man-made disaster like an oil spill, a natural disaster like earthquake, hurricane, flood, fire, or even disease could potentially cause a bottleneck effect, where some of the alleles will be overrepresented, some of the alleles will be underrepresented, and some of the alleles will be eliminated completely from the population. And this effect got its name because of the shape of a bottle where the neck narrows just as the gene pool often narrows. So populations that have suffered bottleneck incidents have lost at least some alleles. And what it does is it reduces individual variation and adaptability. Now, the founder effect occurs when a new population is started by only a few individuals that don't represent the gene pool of the larger population. So take these butterflies as an example. These new butterflies that have colonized this island, by the way, the founder effect usually happens on islands, this smaller population is not representative of the larger population found on the original island. This is an example of the founder effect. Now, when you think of natural selection, you think of Charles Darwin. It is a clear violation of conditions that are necessary for the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium because those that have the most adaptive traits live on and reproduce. Therefore, the alleles are going to be represented disproportionately in frequencies in generations to follow. When you think of gene flow, think of the word flow, think of movement, migration. So gene flow is when there is genetic exchange due to migration of individuals between populations. Gene flow, after a while, actually tends to reduce differences between populations. If we apply that to humans, think about globalization. As we have globalized, the less varied we have become. In other words, the more similar we have become over time. A mutation is just a change in an organism's DNA. In other words, I can change the gene pool of a population, and a mutation is very important because it's the original source of genetic variation. Therefore, it's basically how evolution can be started. So mutations in sexual recombination generate genetic variation, where only mutations in cell lines that produce gametes can be passed along to offspring. Now, most point mutations are mutations that affect a single base of DNA. Most of them are harmless. However, if that point mutation causes a change in the function of the protein, then it can be harmful, as is the point mutation that causes sickle cell disease. It's caused by a single point mutation. And what this does is gives the person sickle cell anemia. However, something called the heterozygote advantage is leading to greater variation in a population, because if I have someone that's heterozygous for sickle cell anemia, not only is that person resistant to malaria, but that person is also resistant to sickle cell anemia. So this heterozygote advantage is actually maintaining genetic diversity, because if I'm homozygous for sickle cell, then I am vulnerable to malaria. I probably won't survive, and therefore I will not pass on being homozygous dominant. If I'm recessive, then that means I have sickle cell disease, and I also won't survive and pass on that trait. It's only the heterozygous individuals that will survive and then pass on that favorable trait.